Hello, my name is Jeff Fullington, and I'm here with a group of concerned persons that are coming together to discuss critical social justice theory. And we have Jennifer, Aaron, Jody, and student Jay, and we're part of the mental health profession and academia. So I figured I would let everyone go around and introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. We have Aaron
Okay,
first, Aaron
and
Kinsvater.
I can start. Um, Hi, everybody. My name's Aaron Kinsvater, and I am an associate professor at the University of Vermont, and I teach counselor education there.
Um, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Friend. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field for 30 years and I'm currently in practice in the Washington, D.C. area.
And we have Jay, who's a
Hello,
student.
everyone. My name is Justin. I am currently a first year graduate student of mental health counseling in New England.
And Jody.
Hi, I'm Jody Shaw. I work at Smith College in the Department of Residence Life.
Okay. And my name's Jeff. I'm a certified peer counselor here in Seattle, Washington. So, the first question we were going to discuss is what is it that led each one of you to want to connect with other people that had concerns about critical theory and critical social justice? So, let's just go in the same order. And Aaron, we can hear from you.
Oh yeah, it's a little bit hard to pick an exact moment. My concern started sometime around 2010 when there was this essential shift in philosophy around racism, which was with the publication of 2007 and the subsequent follow up book um, by Daryl Wing Sue on microaggressions in everyday society. That caused a shift whereby um, acts of racism became divorced from intent and also became subjective. And so it became very hard to determine under what conditions one might be um, reasonably considered to be racist. And one of the things that alarmed me is that um, Sue's work paved the way um, because you didn't need intent, and because whether a microaggression had occurred was, you know, entirely determined by the subjective experiences of another person. Uh, that's pretty scary. What in addition to that, though, um, Sue used the uh, terms that you would typically associate with law enforcement. So he used terms like victim and perpetrator. And so what that meant is that, you know, any person, whether they meant to or not, uh, could wind up being understood as a perpetrator without ever having any intent. And so that was the first red flag. And since that has happened, I have been watching this orthodoxy grow on campus. It's, you know, I think the next thing that happened in around 2015 that raised red flags for me is that our university adopted a bias response team that has such a large definition of bias that um, you would be more hard pressed to find what falls outside of the definition than what would fall inside of it. So bias can mean almost anything, and there's an anonymous process for reporting bias, and so it creates a situation in which people are, you know, beginning to be afraid to share their views on controversial topics in the classroom, both professors and students, because they're worried that that might end up being reported to this sort of, shadowy university bureaucracy whose job is to police these matters. And so that was also frightening. And then most recently, what really began to make me want to reach out and connect with other people who were concerned were the adoption by the University of Vermont of so-called equity, diversity, and inclusion guidelines, which are highly politicized and are clearly policies that are informed by certain political philosophies. And these are being integrated into professors' annual reviews. And again, the issue of subjectivity comes up because it's going to be up to somebody besides the professor to determine if you are being inclusive, if you're being diverse, and if you are promoting equity enough. So none of these terms have any kind of a definition, but we're all sort of expected to do them. We're all being evaluated on them, but we have no way in which those are to be validated. So again, that it creates this, it's essentially created a situation at the university where people are afraid not only that they might say the wrong thing, but that they might not say the right thing. And so it's kind of come, full circle. I also think that it's really set up a longer term concern. One of the things that happened with the election, just prior to the election, Donald Trump had pledged to create a a program whereby patriotism was going to be required in education. And in my mind, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and anti-racism initiatives really paved the way for and opened the door for universities to be manipulated by whatever political ideology tends to have power at a particular time. So universities have lost their political neutrality, and that's really interfering with what universities are there for, which is the neutral pursuit of truth. So that's what those are the series of events that have led me to say, you better reach out to other professionals. My primary concern right now is the implication this is going to have for school children who are being taught by school counselors. Some of these ideas pertaining to equity, diversity, and inclusion that strike me as incredibly unhealthy. And I'm also concerned about clients, counseling clients who are in very vulnerable relationships with their therapists. I'm very concerned that therapists who hold certain political convictions are now being encouraged to use those convictions within the sacred space of the therapeutic relationship. And that strikes me as just as very, very bad news for those in society who are vulnerable, which is to say those who put themselves in the trust of counselors and children who are in school being taught by adults who take this point of view. So that's a little bit about me and what brought me here.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Jen, what's your story?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's kind of similar to Aaron. It's not just one particular thing I can pinpoint. It is so many things. And but before I lose that stream of thought, I want to say that yes, I agree that therapy really is a sacred space. You have a person coming to you with their absolute deepest wounds and vulnerabilities, and to inject politics into that, to me, is such a violation of that relationship and such a violation of my professional ethics. And I cannot imagine the level of harm that would do if I made assumptions about my clients on the basis of their race or their sex, such as, oh, you're Black, so you must be a victim of oppression, so I need to treat you accordingly. Or you're white, so you are part of an oppressive class and you're enabling white supremacy. I just cannot imagine bringing that into a session and into my clinical work. And the fact that we're basically being encouraged to do so is really concerning to me. But I started getting concerned with some of what was being put out publicly by the American Psychological Association, particularly their guidelines for treating boys and men, and their statement that traditional masculinity is toxic. And I started to see male clients coming in expressing anxiety and distress and guilt, calling themselves toxic. I had men come in who were really, really good people, but who now, instead of feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment that they were able to pursue a career and succeed in their career and support their families, to feel a sense of shame and guilt about that. And I thought, my gosh, how destructive, and how destructive to label an entire sex toxic. So those things concerned me. And then from my own experience, I had an experience in my former workplace with critical social justice and critical race theory being very heavily pushed on the clinicians. And it became clear that accepting that ideology was the absolutely only acceptable way to think about racial issues and issues of diversity. And I'm aware that that's been happening in a lot of workplaces in our field. Some fields seem to suffer from this infiltration more than others. It's becoming quite embedded into the mental health professions, which I think is really regrettable for, many reasons, but mainly for the reasons that I just outlined. But people are being forced to do implicit bias trainings and tests, and to discuss this in front of all their colleagues. And the workplace is becoming less collegial and more political. And I see that in our field, more and more focus is being placed on indoctrinating the clinicians with critical race theory and with critical social justice theory, rather than providing training so that we can provide better services to our clients. And I think that's a real failure in the field. And so I really want to protect the integrity of the mental health field. And so that's why I decided to reach out to other concerned clinicians.
Well, thank you very much. Justin, let's hear from you.
Hello. So my history with the woke stuff, or the critical theory stuff, really goes back to the early to mid 2000s. Back when like blogs started to become really popular, I stumbled upon, I don't know if you would call it third wave or fourth wave feminism, but it's the more radical anti-male brand of feminism. And so that was really my first encounter with this kind of critical postmodern woke sort of social justice perspective. But back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, it was all just like little blogs in little corners of the internet where people were having their conversations. Over the past 15 years, however, I have seen more and more of this same sort of rhetoric creeping into the mainstream discourse. And what I mean by this sort of rhetoric is the scapegoating and the blaming. So in third and fourth wave feminism, it's patriarchy and toxic masculinity. In critical race theory, it's whiteness and, systemic racism. And I really recognize these terms as proxy terms for people. So when you say patriarchy and toxic masculinity, what I hear is men. When you say, heteronormative, white, male, whiteness, I just hear an attack on people's identity categories. I started back at university in 2018, and during this period, you had the Evergreen situation unfolded, and then you had Lindsay Shepherd had her fiasco, her cancellation, or whatever you want to call it. And that was when I started to kind of wake up to the fact that what used to be niche corners of the internet where some radical political pundits were having their conversations with each other was starting to creep out into, the space of flesh and blood, real people doing real things out in the physical world. So I started to become a little concerned at that point, but I still kind of thought to myself, these are at certain institutions on the other side of the country, very far away. It's just a few crazy radical people. And then I had my interview for graduate admissions, and I prepared myself very well for this interview. I looked up sample questions. I thought deeply about the questions and what my honest, authentic answers were to these questions. Then I got to the actual interview, and like 5 of the 7 questions were all about social justice topics, asking me about, LGBTQ plus IAA, asking about marginalized populations, asking me about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I had no answers for these questions. I was completely taken or caught off guard by this. And I had to kind of fumble through the answers to the best of my ability. So that was concerning to me. I thought, well, what am I getting myself into? But I thought, you know what, that's just a graduate interview. Once I'm in the program, everything will be okay. Won't be so crazy. Then first semester starts, and we had to take a social and cultural diversity class, and the entire class was critical theory. Every single word of it. There was no sorry about that. There was no classical liberal framework for diversity and social justice. Do you want to start my part over?
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
I think I think there's sort of it's almost as if your cat is sort of agreeing with your perspective here.
She
This is
knew.
These days, we're all in our homes. We've got stuff going on.
She knew. She knows what's happening and that it's really important. So she decided to so the semester starts and we have to take that class, and it's all based on critical social justice. At this point, I'd been learning about postmodernism. I've been learning about critical theory. I'd been learning about the Frankfurt School, post-structuralism, social constructionism in my own free time. And I get to class, and the language that they're using is all this woke language. And what really woke me up that this is real now was when I told my professor, and I loved my professor. I have nothing against her personally. I told her I'm post-race. I'm colorblind. When I encounter a person, I don't take those things into consideration. Sexual orientation, gender identity, color. You might as well ask me like how important someone's socks are. I really, those aren't things I take into account. I take into account the individual person and their character. I grew up learning about Martin Luther King, and I really internalized that. And so when my professor told me that was problematic and that I needed to unlearn that, that's when I realized that we have a real problem, especially not only higher learning, the academy, but in the field of mental health itself, because for some reason I thought counseling and that those helping fields would be kind of buttressed against this sort of thing, but they're really not. And I'm starting to see that the ethics of counseling and the desire to help people makes the field especially vulnerable to the encroachment of this sort of thing. So that's what got me really concerned and looking for other people that were having similar situations with me, because that class was a real struggle for me. And every time I had to write a paper, I wrote it authentically and genuinely. When I disagreed, I did not shy away from voicing my disagreement. But every time it was like, I'd submit a paper and I was like, will I be a student a week from now? So
Yeah, you wondered if there was going to be consequences for not complying with the ideology.
yeah, I think I got lucky. So
Well, we're glad you did find us and seek other people out. Jody, you have quite a story too.
Yeah, my story is a little different. I'm not a mental health practitioner, but I'm so glad that I found you all. Because being able to talk freely is something I've not enjoyed in a group situation, I think, in a long time, either in my workplace or even at like parties, So I'm not a mental health practitioner, but working in the Department of Residence Life at Smith, I am, part of my job is I'm concerned with the identity development, and by identity, I mean actual identity development of students, young women in particular. And even saying the word identity, I'm a newcomer to higher education, and so I guess I didn't know that the word identity has kind of come to mean something much different than what I think it means. I think of identity as being a constant negotiation and a very fluid thing that, depending on context, and depending on how others are perceiving you and how you perceive yourself and that kind of thing. Whereas in my department, I was told that, no, what we're concerned about is social identity, which is what Jay was talking about, like that students are, or people are, this immutable characteristics. In other words, that's who you are. And that is something that is part of what's called the Residence Life curriculum. It's a co-curriculum that our department, professionals in our department who have learned it in graduate school, then teach it to student leaders who go on to teach it in the houses with students. And from what I can tell, and it has this model of victim oppressor. It has, I saw one handout that had dominant groups, and then it had subordinated groups, and subordinated groups was like everybody in the world. And then dominant groups was a very short list, white, male, straight, just like of one very particular group of people. And so this is concerning to me because if somebody tells me, we're basically teaching students that to know yourself is to know your immutable characteristics, and to learn what kinds of signifiers we're supposed to attach to each of those immutable characteristics. Like somehow that's identity development. And like Jeff, when I look at, if somebody tells me their immutable characteristics, or if I perceive them, I know zero about that person. Like that gives me no information about somebody. It's much different if a student approaches me and says, hey, I'm Latino, and because of that, it has affected my life in X way. Well, then of course, that's going to be important information for me to have, because it actually tells me something about how that's had an impact on that particular individual. But otherwise, it doesn't tell me anything. And it's really disturbing to me that that's what the department is conveying to students, that you can know somebody by knowing their immutable characteristics, and that they come with all these pre-attached signifiers that you learn from handouts or whatnot. And also another thing that really bothers me is the victim oppressor model, I guess, because I've been thinking about why this bothered me. It's just so incredibly disempowering to have two scripts: one script for the oppressor class, as Jen put it, and one script for the oppressed class. And the script for the oppressor class is, if you are in that group as determined by your immutable characteristics, is that you have power and you have privilege, and no matter what you do in your life, like you've kind of got a free pass. So it's and then if you are oppressed, the script is, I am oppressed, I am marginalized. Really, no matter what I do in my life, I'm always kind of be behind because I'm a member of this oppressed group. That is incredibly disempowering. And it wasn't actually until I looked at CTA's website that I found an article by Lisa Marciano talking about locus of control. And that's where I really learned it. I was like, that's what bothers me so much about this, because it puts the locus of control outside of the individual. And so, and it also sets up a weird dependency between groups. It's like telling one group, hey, if you just confess, if you say this script, then somehow you're going to free this other group. And then it tells the other group, you are dependent upon this other group to confess their privilege or whatever. And I just find the whole thing really disturbing. And so now that I know that what it's called, locus of control, and I know that and having a stronger internal, both are necessary, but having a stronger internal locus of control is associated with better outcomes. I'm going to assume that's for identity development as well, and less stress in life, and so on and so forth. And so my story is very long, but I just wanted to focus, like, since we're talking about mental health, just my role as a person in higher education, working closely with students, not on the academic side, but on the identity development side. And that I feel like we're failing students by focusing on these other things that are actively causing them harm. That's the only way I can put it. And that I feel are racist also. I feel asking me to engage in racial prejudice and asking me to teach students to do that. So that's why that's I guess my connection to CTA, and what I find really concerning about working in the field with young adults.
Well, thank you. Very glad
And
that you're here.
Jeff, we haven't heard from you. What is it that brought you to led
Well,
you to want to
originally I was an English major in the 90s at the local university in Louisiana. And I had to switch majors because I kept encountering it there. I wanted to study Shakespeare. I wanted to study the classics, and being told that they're dead white European males, they're oppressive, they're bad for Western civilization. And this was just shocking to me that this was coming out of the English department. So I ended up changing my major, and I didn't really think much about it after that. I had no idea that it was going to accelerate to the extent that it did. But what really galvanized me recently was I'm here in Washington State, and we have the Evergreen
Mm.
protest. which I heard about when they happened, but I didn't really pay attention to. And I recently watched the documentary on YouTube about the Evergreen protest. And that's when all the pieces kind of fell into place. That's when I realized how pervasive this was, what a critical mass it's reached. I didn't know there were other people to reach out to until I saw that. And then I'm like, oh my God, there's other people dealing with this stuff just like me. I've been in Seattle 10 years. I moved up here from Louisiana, and it's been culture shock ever since. And part of the culture shock is this critical justice theory that's kind of embedded into everything here. And I get painted as an oppressive white male no matter what I say or do. I'm not white, I'm Cajun, I'm LGBT, I'm on the autism spectrum. Like, I fall into all of the categories that they're saying are oppressed, but I still get treated as an oppressor because of my skin color and my gender. So all of that was kind of Alice in Wonderland upside down world experience to me. And when I saw the Evergreen protest documentary, I saw the students, and they're students, that's what students do, but the way the faculty, the way the staff empowered the students and bought into this and kind of caved to the students' demand, that was what was shocking to me. And that's when and they're kind of doing the same thing in my field with mental health trainings. Every training we've had this year has been on race and equity, no mental health topics at all this year. And so I've noticed a creep even in my own profession. And so that's when I realized that there were other people out there that were also encountering this. And I found them on Twitter, found them on Facebook, social media, and we started meeting in person. And it's been really, really helpful to encounter other people and talk about these things. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
You know, I think maybe that's an important thing for us to pause and just stress is how important it is to find other people who are out there who are seeing the same things. And we may not necessarily agree on all aspects, but just finding people that you're able to have a conversation with in sort of a safe way is just so very important. And I think it's important for anyone watching just to understand that you are not alone. And increasingly, communities are coming together in order to facilitate conversations about the encroachment of critical social justice on our institutions and in our schools and in higher education. So you are not alone. Just remember that if you're watching this video and you share some of the concerns.
Absolutely. Come hang out with us. Find
That's
us.
right. Come hang out with
And
us.
that brings me to my next question. That's a good point. Is what do you think needs to happen next? Once we come to you, like where do we go from here? Aaron, we can start with you.
Yeah. Well, I think it should be taken as a serious hypothesis, and I'll speak specifically to the higher education because that's where I kind of live. I don't think universities are able to stop themselves. I think that this has just gone too far, and universities can no longer self-correct. And they need to be managed. Universities are getting an awful lot of money to prepare people who are able to engage with each other in a pluralistic society, and they are not doing that. They have gone over, by and large, into the ideology business. And so we cannot count on universities to fix this themselves. And I think there needs to be legislation. But one thing I would say is that it would be very bad for us as a society to outlaw the teaching of critical race theory in the universities, because when you have an idea that is based in discrimination, the way that critical social justice is, you want as many people as possible talking about that. But the difference is you've got to make the universities 10 times more safe for those kinds of conversations. So there needs to be legislation, um, uh, and an idea I have about what this could be is that there are already laws in the workplace that prohibit discrimination based on, uh, marriage status, uh, race, ethnicity, gender. Uh, Ideology needs to be moved to that list of protected classes, because my experience on the university campus over the years has showed me that, and I'm a leftist person. I should be, I'm a liberal person. I should fit in very well at the university, but my experience is that that's not good enough. You have to be far left. You have to make a choice between being actively anti-racist or else accept that you are a racist. So there needs to be protection for ideology on campus. And until that's done, there's only going to be one conversation about diversity going on campus, and it's the one that most closely aligns with the most radical views on this. And so I would say, first and foremost, we need to have legislation that protects people like me. When I'm in the classroom and these issues, diversity, equity, inclusion, are now required in each class, the way that I avoid indoctrinating my students is that I introduce them, the students, usually to minority authors who disagree with each other. So for example, this last semester, I had articles by D'Angelo and Kende, but I assigned along with D'Angelo and Kende, John McWhorter and Coleman Hughes, and lots of other minority authors who wouldn't necessarily identify themselves with the identitarian left. And students really got a lot out of that. A lot of them had not read authors that had different sort of ideas about race and justice in the United States. But it's becoming clear that, and I can't believe that this is happening, but it is, that heterodoxy, the approach whereby you share different points of view on these sensitive topics, is no longer going to be tolerated, at least in my program. And so even teaching this from multiple points of view is causing me a great deal of difficulty, and there's nowhere to go in the university for help with that. So it's, and in fact, our academic union which is there to protect free speech, really has taken a very passive stance on these issues. And so they'll say, well, you have the right to free speech, but that free speech is also limited by how much you certain parameters. So it makes talking about these issues so very difficult, because there's nothing you can really appeal to and get protection or help. And so I think legislation is where we have to go. I haven't always felt that way, but I think that's where we're at.
Okay, thank you very much. Jen, what are your thoughts?
I have so many thoughts about this and so many worries. First off, I really hope that the mental health profession can resist this attempt to re-racialize our society. Sam Harris said something, I don't think I can quote it exactly, but it really resonated with me, that ultimately different skin colors should be of no more interest to us than different hair colors. And that for me is the world that I live in. I look at each person as an individual, and that's true in my personal life, it's true in my clinical work. And I've been really disappointed that our field has really been buying what I consider to be a false bill of goods and ultimately a harmful bill of goods. And so I hope that we'll get back to seeing people as individuals with their own strengths and limitations. And I hope that clinicians will, who are, not in private practice, but working for an organization or agency, will jointly, I don't really recommend doing it on your own unless you're prepared to accept a lot of risks, but jointly ask the administrators for more clinical trainings. Trainings have really gotten away from being focused on the clinical and the improvement of services and are much more geared now towards questions of diversity and equity. So really asking for the tools that clinicians need to continue to do good work. And I really hope, and this speaks to one of my fears, I hope that clinicians will get together and resist any attempts from our professional licensing boards to make holding certain views mandatory and a condition for continued licensure. Because I have already seen on the webpage of the National Association of Social Workers calls for social workers to participate in dismantling white supremacy. Well, I grew up very much the same way we talked about earlier, with really growing up valuing and believing fully what Martin Luther King said. And I grew up terrified of white supremacists. These were people who were violent, vicious, evil, burned crosses on people's lawns. I'm terrified of those people. And to have that term carelessly bandied about and attributed to an entire group of people on the basis of race is so extraordinarily abusive. I mean, you may as well just be calling all of us pedophiles. And I find it very disturbing that the largest professional organization for social workers is using that terminology. And for me, ignites a fear that this might spread over into our professional licensure as well, that unless you accept this particular ideology, we believe you're not fit to practice. And so I really hope that we will build a critical mass of mental health professionals who are ready to stand up should any of our licensing boards do that. So that's my that's my biggest fear, and one of my prayers is that we don't allow our profession to just become a vehicle for passing along this ideology, and that we get back to what we do best, which is really helping people to survive and thrive in this world.
Thank you. Jay, what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, so I've been in, I guess you could say I've been involved in the culture war a bit longer than other people in the meeting. And I've kind of seen how it's developed over time. The postmodern critical theory, social constructionism, this multi-headed hydra that makes up what we call wokeism, is pestiferous and invasive and incessant. And it constant browbeating, nagging, berating on the same things over and over and over repetitively. Something definitely needs to be done about it because it is encroaching upon everything. as far as the mental health field, what I genuinely believe needs to happen is that these concepts need to be bounded within their own conceptual space and presented as their own separate uh, theory of counseling with their own chapter. Instead of being an addendum at the end of every single chapter in my theories book, behaviorism from a multicultural diversity inclusivity perspective, you just need to have the one chapter about that perspective. And I find it so interesting to myself how we're taught that it is extraordinarily important as counselors that we don't impose our values and views on our clientele, because there's that power differential between ourselves and the client is vulnerable to that. At the same time, professors, many of whom are middle-aged and older, have a lot more experience and education behind them, will take 24, 25-year-old students and use that power inferential to push this ideology upon their students. I find that so interesting to me, that cognitive blind spot that they have, that sort of double think that's going on. So that's really what I think needs to happen is, when we're taught, cognitive behavioral theory, we're presented the theory, and then we're presented with strengths and weaknesses of the theory. We're presented with opposing viewpoints, criticisms to that theory. The same thing needs to happen with the woke stuff. So the way I would envision the social and cultural diversity class would be, since they brought a lot of history into this class, would maybe bring um, Martin Luther King into it. Instead of talking about how bad Columbus was and how evil America is, maybe talk about where America got it right. Maybe present the perspective that America was founded upon a promise, and that we've struggled, really struggled for, generations to live up to that promise, and how every generation we get it just a little bit better, right? That's one perspective that can be presented as a counterpoint to the narrative of, the critical social justice theories. So that's really what I think needs to happen, is that there needs to be a heterodox diversity of perspectives on what is justice, what is fairness, what is racism, really, since we seem to be redefining it. And there needs to be disconfirming views. There needs to be disconfirming evidence presented, and it needs to be an actual conversation instead of an indoctrination session. And we need to be very careful. We need to use the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We need to use the Constitution. We need to use the Bill of Rights to protect the code of ethics that bound our profession, so that the code of ethics does not get infiltrated by this. Because once they take the code of ethics, it's done. And we're already starting to see that with the APA guidelines on the practice with boys and men. Everything that was in that guideline was hook, line, and sinker, I guess you could say, from radical feminism that I was reading on blogs in the early and mid 2000s. It's really infiltrating and needs to get pushed back into its own corner.
Thank you. Very helpful. Jody,
Sorry for the rant.
what do you
And no,
think?
that was great, because it's like I can jump off from there from the higher education residential life realm. I too have often thought about, well, what would be better? What would be a better way than implementing this social justice curriculum, which so much focus on immutable characteristics and signifiers, and attaching pre-assigning signifiers to people based on those characteristics. And I think there is a much more positive approach. So there's opportunities. For one, I don't think that we need. For one, I think that stuff, critical social justice or whatever you want to call it, really does belong in the classroom as a theory to be discussed and debated. And I understand why it was brought into the realm, the co-curricular realm, but really I see that we need to redefine the profession of people working in higher education in the co-curricular way, as kind of, and redefining what identity means, as something that's not based on immutable characteristics, and helping students, one, advocating for them, like if they have a conflict with somebody and they contact us, like just saying, "Hey, good job contacting us." Like that's the first step. You're going to graduate and move into a bureaucratic world. So you found the right person to contact. Like just, there's so many teaching moments that I feel like we don't take advantage of. And then helping students navigate conflict in a way that's actually effective, rather than, okay, you had a conflict with somebody, so now you have to figure out who had the power in the situation, because who had what skin color and who had what, who belongs to which group, and then all the intersections of that. I feel like that's just so ineffective. Like helping students to, I don't know, things like nonviolent communication, thinking about having more in-person things, getting them, I know like even roommate contracts are negotiated via text. I mean, there'll be two kids in a room texting to each other. That's what I've been told. Like try to encourage in-person, face-to-face conversations. I know they do that. Like for example, at Deerfield Academy, they don't allow the students to have cell phones. Like the students, it's part of the community. They greet each other and then they make eye contact. Like just real simple things that we might take for granted. Like I think students are coming into college now not having that, and not having that ability to even make eye contact. And then also there's a lot of anxiety and depression issues going on for young adults increasingly. And I tend to think we could probably focus more energy on that, on trying to determine what are the root causes of that, and put our energy into supporting whatever students need to embark on their own path with their mental health, like how they're going to, and empower them. Like you're going to be the one, you are going to be the one to navigate this issue that you have with anxiety. You are going to be the one, and you are going to be able to do this. You can do this. And to not tell students of color, you're oppressed and you especially need our help because you can't handle this, or you're being harmed by, for example, by Jody. Jody makes a video and you guys, this is harming you and you need, no, you're not. My message is you got this. You can handle this. You can handle conflict. You can handle different viewpoints. You can handle this, and give students the tools to be able to handle that, and instead of telling them they can't handle it, or that no matter what, it's going to be handled for them because they're white, or, it just seems like everything we're doing is so ineffective. So I guess in my field, I think it would behoove us to focus more on the positive and how we can help students in a more effective way. And something else that really bothers me, I want to mention, is that I don't see any talk about outcomes. Now, I'm new to higher education, but, I know that outcomes is important. And so we have this curriculum that's based on social justice, but do we have any way of measuring if it's actually working? Because the way I see it, students handling conflict, it doesn't seem like they really have the tools. We're not giving them tools. It doesn't seem like it's having the effect we want it to have. Like if the goal, like what is the goal? First of all, do we want a peace? Do we want less conflict? And is it working? I think that's a really important question to ask. Is what we're doing working? Are students just continuing to grow more depressed, more anxious? So I think that's important. And I don't see anyone asking that question. on the residence life side. I don't know about the academic side. So those are just a few ideas I had for residence life departments.
Thank you. Those are
How
great
about,
ideas.
how about you, Jeff? What do you think needs to happen?
Well, I agree with Aaron about, I think that there is not much you can do about the people that are immersed in this theory. Like, so I don't think, again, locus of control, like, there's nothing you can do about them externally, but you can push back on when you're under attack by them. You can hold fast to your values and not capitulate to the ideology. So there's things you can do to kind of keep your self integrity. Creating support networks, I think, for people that are struggling, isolated or alone. Like, I kind of work outside of the system, so I can push back and speak up against it a little more freely. But people who are jeopardizing their livelihoods or their jobs, to have some kind of support network where not only can they get support for what they're going through, but there would be people in the network that could advocate on their behalf and not so much expose them to risk. But basically pushing back however we can as individuals, as groups, and creating those strong support networks to fortify and reinforce our own values. And another thing is critical thinking. I think
Hmm.
there's some of this is happening because there's a lack of critical thinking. And I think it used to be taught much more in the schools than it is now. And having environments where people have an opportunity to exercise their critical thinking skills and not just go along with this ideology under this social pressure, and teaching not what to think but how to think. And I think if you taught more of how to think, they could tease some of this out for themselves and see the manipulation involved in a lot of it, or that it is an ideology and there are alternative viewpoints and perspectives. So those are some things I can think of off the top of my head that I think would be good directions to try to go next.
Can I just comment on one thing you said? I think that at some point maybe we can have another video about this, but I am very concerned about the tactics that are used to draw people into this, and I think I certainly think manipulation is involved, and it's in the sense that it's manipulative and in terms of this to the extent that this ideology is meant to gratify the needs of the teacher or the counselor to feel just or to feel effective in their goal to change society at the expense of their students' ability to think critically and of their counseling clients. There really is a predatory aspect to this ideology, and at some point, I think we should have a conversation about that.
Well, thank you all for coming together today for this conversation. I think it was very helpful and productive, and thank you for your contributions. And we hope to be able to do more. And is there a way? Is there a good way to contact us or for people that
I'll
I
give
don't even know
my
where this is?
email is kinsvater.aaron@gmail.com, and folks are perfectly welcome to reach out. And very soon there will be additional communities opening up that we can advertise a little more broadly. But there's a great deal in the works right now. There's a very large number of people who are concerned and who are actively working to come together to form communities and to organize a response to the encroachment of critical social justice into our institutions, into our workspaces, and into our children's classrooms.
There's a very large coalition forming across the country. You could probably find them on a face for K through 12 for parents and teachers. There's a number of small coalitions. You could probably find them on Facebook. I'm trying to think how I could help people find them. Yeah, write to Aaron.
And I put my email. Mine is jeff.fullington@gmail.com, and you're welcome to contact me as well. I'm in touch with several groups and organizations that are forming for this too. So,
How do I
okay, well,
change my
thank you again for being
name?
here, and hope to do it again soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Aaron. Take care.
Let me
Oh,
put
wait,
my email out.
he wants to
Okay.
change
Yeah,
his.
I'm gonna give my my email. I'm gonna put it on my.
Yeah.
So it's ironlion_84 at protonmail.com. If anyone is a student and is kind of encountering this woke stuff and struggling with it, feel free to reach out to me. I can give you advice on how to kind of navigate this stuff, you know, without rocking the boat too much, but while maintaining your integrity and your own personal values as you go through this. So feel free to just shoot me an email.
Yeah, and I didn't really tell the story of me being a staff member at Smith College, but if there's any staff in higher education, I mean faculty too, but it's particularly treacherous territory for staff who don't have tenure and don't necessarily have the freedom of speech protections that are afforded to faculty. So you can reach out to me. I didn't give you my email, but you can. Should I put my email? I'll put my Twitter. Oh, just Google Jody Shaw. God, now I'm getting all flustered here.
Can people direct message you from Twitter, Jody?
Yeah, that's what. Yes, Smith Surge. Yeah, I'm hoping with Twitter.
Okay. And,
Well, I'm glad to have found each of you, and looking forward to new friends contacting us and to the conversations that we're going to have.
same for sure.
Definitely.
Well, have a great day, and we'll see you again. Take care.